For quite some time now, I've been thinking about different ways of learning and meaning making around the key insight that all learning is connecting new information to existing information. Now, there's lots of work that's been done in this space already, work around the idea of kind of self-explanation or concept mapping and so on. But I was keen to try to connect this knowledge with the idea of bulletproof definitions and particularly really key insights that you might record in a lecture or learn from someone that you then want to explore further. I've also been thinking about how this approach comes together with the new advances in artificial intelligence and abilities to see AI and ChatGPT as one example of it as a personal tutor. What I've come up with is this idea of a process or a learning process called layered deconstruction. Here's a bit of an overview. You might like to pause the video and read through this at your own time, and I'm just going to make a few brief comments about this outline. So this is kind of what I've said already. When we make sense of something, all we're doing is relating it to something that we already know. Without relating new knowledge to our old knowledge, it basically won't stick in our memory in any way. The idea of layered deconstruction, we start from a high value proposition. A proposition is basically a statement or a phrase that captures a key idea. And a high value one is one that is accurate and also contains some sort of wisdom from a certain domain. The one that we're going to be looking at in more detail today is a bit of a meme, but it's also correct. And it's also something that I've not known anything about before, but I've heard it and thought, what does that actually mean? And I feel like it's important. I should know more about that. And that phrase today is mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And you can think of similar phrases in other domains. Something like all texts are constructs could be one example. Something around supply and demand in economics. F equals MA in terms of physics and so on and so forth. So the power of this approach is that it helps us to explicitly link the new insight to something that we already know. And when I say explicitly, we're actually making those connections visible. And the fact that we're doing it in layers helps us to keep perspective on the learning. So we're basically going to be taking one initial phrase, in this case, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and we're going to be exploring each of the components of that bulletproof sentence to try to make sense of it. But with any kind of branching generative learning activity or any learning activity where we're kind of exploring and potentially going down rabbit holes, you can kind of find yourself potentially getting stuck or spending far too long exploring one area and getting lost in it and then kind of losing sight of where you're up to. So the idea of doing it in layers is we kind of keep perspective of what I'm calling the expanding knowledge frontier. We're kind of actually seeing the project expand, and that helps us to more accurately and more effectively prioritize, decide when to say, okay, we've probably explored enough here, I need to explore a bit more over there, to keep the knowledge exploration kind of rounded and more balanced around the key idea. We've got some guidelines for layer deconstruction. So we basically, every time we see something in an initial layer that we don't understand, so in the first case, the first word might be mitochondria. Whenever we see something that we don't understand, we want to expand that into the next layer. So deconstruct that idea or that concept in the next layer. And we kind of stop expanding from any particular branch of the knowledge map when we hit a concept that we're able to relate back to our prior knowledge. So we've started from something that makes no sense to me. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. We keep on breaking it down. I'm going to stop once a branch hits knowledge that I already know, or when I hit a concept that is taking me into another knowledge domain that like really opens up another knowledge map and is going to take us a little bit off track, and we probably don't need to go into in heaps of detail to understand the core concept. So basically what I'm going to do now is show you how this is what I've done. I've done this over the last, probably took me about half an hour to put this together, maybe 40 minutes. And I'm going to talk you through the process that I went through to create this map. It then took me longer to actually animate it and so on and write the instructions. But the actual learning process was, I'd say, about 30 to 40 minutes. So I started with this sentence, this proposition: mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And I didn't know what mitochondria meant. So that was the first thing. And so I basically jumped on ChatGPT, and I will share the link in the description here of the specific chat that I had on ChatGPT with the AI. And I said basically something like, what is mitochondria? And I found out that mitochondria are membrane-bound organelles. Okay, great. I also worked out, I don't really know what it means in this case by cell. Like I roughly have an idea of what a cell is, but I don't remember much. So I said, what are we talking about in terms of the cells? And I learned that it's eukaryotic cells, okay? And in terms of powerhouse, I said, what was powerhouse? And I said, okay, well, it's a powerhouse because it produces energy in the form of ATP. So this is our first layer. We've deconstructed this initial sentence and we've hit the first layer, but still, I'm in a realm of confusion because I don't know what a membrane-bound organelle is. I don't know what a eukaryotic cell is, and I don't know what ATP is, right? So we need to continue this process. We move to the next layer, and I'm using a different color to denote that, and I've just gone red, yellow, pink, green, purple, orange, blue, just because I follow the rainbow, or the rainbow rhyme, should I say. So first thing I said was, what's an organelle? I asked ChatGPT what that was, and I found out that it's a specialized subunit in a cell whose function is enclosed in its lipid membrane. Okay, still confused there. What about eukaryotic? It has a nucleus in an enclosed membrane, and it's distinct from a prokaryotic cell. Okay. What about ATP? Well, that's adenosine triphosphate, a molecule that carries energy within cells. Okay, so we've done kind of, from the original one, we've broken out one layer, and I'm kind of denoting that with this dotted line here. But still, I'm confused. We still need to keep on expanding because I haven't yet hit a concept that I'm able to connect to prior knowledge, because I don't know what these lipid membranes are, what a nucleus is, what a prokaryotic cell is, and what adenosine triphosphate is. So I need to keep expanding, and I haven't yet hit a concept that makes me think, okay, well, that's really far away from this idea of mitochondria, so I should stop. So we keep going. Nucleus. And now I know what a nucleus is in terms of physics, but I don't know what it is in terms of biology. So in this case, I find out that it's a membrane-bound organelle in a eukaryotic cell containing the cell's genetic material. Okay, so we've got this membrane-bound idea. Here we've got, so it's one of these things, which I'm kind of already deconstructing over here. In a eukaryotic cell, that's a cell with a nucleus containing the cell's genetic material, DNA. Okay, so this is the part of the cell that contains the genetic material. I'm starting to understand this because I've got a bit of an idea of what genetic material and DNA are. So this branch is starting to make sense to me. Let's keep going. What do we mean by a membrane? Also known as a plasma membrane, a fixable selective permeable barrier, regulates substance movements in and out of the cell. Okay, so a membrane, that makes sense because any sort of membrane kind of regulates the movement of something. I've got some wicking beds in my garden, and they have a membrane in them that allows the water to pass through it, but not other things. So I understand kind of what a membrane is. But what about this lipid thing? Lipids are hydrophobic and amphiphilic molecules that form selectively permeable membranes. Okay, so there's some sort of molecule that controls what can make its way through the membrane. So this is starting to make sense to me as well. What about prokaryotic? A cell without a membrane-bound nucleus or other membrane-bound organelles typically found in bacteria and archaea. Okay, and then this adenosine triphosphate. So obviously the word here, it's a molecule, so I don't know how much more I need to understand about the fact that it's a molecule, but it's this energy currency. So I kind of was wondering, what do we mean by energy currency? And I asked ChatGPT, why does a cell need an energy currency, or what is energy currency all about? And it said, when a cell has required energy, adenosine triphosphate, ATP, is broken down into adenosine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate and energy. Okay, so again, we've kind of expanded, and I'm starting, especially over this area here, I'm starting to get a bit of a sense of what's going on. So let's keep breaking it down. So substance movement. So the next thing I was wondering was, well, what actually is moving in a cell? I don't actually really know. So we've got cells, we've got different parts of cells which are each contained within membranes, and there's obviously some stuff going between these membranes, but what's actually moving? What kind of substances? And so I said, what kind of substances move within cells? And it said gases, water, nutrients, waste products, hormones and signaling molecules, proteins, nucleic acids, lipids, vitamins, and cofactors. Okay, so that's interesting. What about ATP is broken down? Let's look at more at this. Okay, can be represented by a chemical reaction. That's starting to get more familiar to me because I understand the basic idea of chemical reactions and the fact that you can have kind of the, what would you call them, the products or the products. I can't even remember what they're called. The inputs and the outputs of the chemical reaction, and sometimes there might be an energy differential between the two, and that means that energy is either required for the reaction or is released within the reaction. When a cell requires energy, again, why does a cell require energy? Well, for essential functions and to maintain homeostasis is what I was told. So that's interesting. Amphiphilic, I didn't know what that meant. So processes both hydrophilic, water attracting, and hydrophobic, water repelling regions, or possesses both. Okay, so that makes sense. Okay, and then I said with this one, okay, I get the idea. A cell contains DNA, genetic material, so probably don't need to explore this more now. So basically, I felt like this particular branch here, I understand that mitochondria are the powerhouse of cells. They're the powerhouse of eukaryotic cells, and eukaryotic cells are the type that have a nucleus and therefore contain genetic material. So within the cells that contain genetic material, mitochondria are the powerhouse. So I felt like I could stop there. I also felt like this branch, because we decided to move into prokaryotic cells, mitochondria only relates to eukaryotic cell. So this info is taking us into a new with a K, don't need the K there, a new knowledge domain. So we probably need to explore, so I can kind of stop there. Okay, so we've done kind of 3, 1, 2, 3. We're moving into a fourth layer of, we've just done kind of 4 layers of deconstruction. So let's keep going. Essential functions. So I didn't know what the kind of essential functions of a cell are. What do cells actually do? So I said, kind of, what are some of the essential functions of cells? And I found that they're all these things: active transport, muscle contraction, DNA replication, and so on and so on. Some of these functions relate to the maintenance of homeostasis too, is something that I found out. What is this homeostasis thing? Okay, the ability of a cell to maintain a balanced and stable internal environment. Okay, that kind of makes sense. And then I felt like here I was kind of ready to move on. Basically, we're describing some type of membrane that allows stuff to selectively move, kind of like Gore-Tex. So I felt like, all right, mitochondria, they're these membrane-bound organelles. So they're like little things in membranes. I'm imagining like a little bubble or something. And they're specialized. And they allow the movement of stuff in and out of them. And I was kind of thinking, okay, so they allow a lot of different things to move across them. I could actually, reflecting, I could explore a little bit. I could ask, like, specifically what moves inside and outside of mitochondria, actually reflecting back on this now, because I don't know, of all these things, I could have asked, which ones actually move in and out of mitochondria and what matters. So there's some sort of mitochondrial, like what actually triggers this mitochondrial reaction would be a question. But I felt like I was kind of getting the sense there, these organelles, and organelles are things within membranes. This regulating substance movement, and so basically it's just something in a packet and there's a membrane, and it kind of acts like Gore-Tex in terms of it lets selective things move in and out. Gore-Tex keeps water out but allows the whatever's in it, like your foot, to breathe through the Gore-Tex shoe. I also felt like here we were excited to get beyond the scope of this, understanding how the ATP and so on works. Again, on reflection, I think, thinking back on this, I could have explored more about mitochondria and what that actually requires, also what moves in and out of these particular membrane-bound organelles. But I felt like I was starting to get a sense there's a lot. This is kind of opening up a whole new bag of worms if we look at all the substances that move across lipid membranes. So it's okay for me to leave there. And then also I felt like I had enough of a sense of what was going on here. We've got a chemical equation. ATP is broken down into ADP, PI, and energy. So that was okay. I was happy to leave that there. And I thought, well, there's a lot of essential functions. Going into this anymore is going to take me down a rabbit hole, so I probably don't need to do that much there. And then, in short, cells need to fight against entropy, the kind of tendency of things to move to disorder, just as everything else does, and so they need energy to do this. Okay, got it. So that was basically 30 to 40 minutes trying to get my head around the idea of mitochondria. And in the end, I felt like I'd done a pretty good exploration. I've worked out it's the powerhouse of the cell. In terms of the cell, we're talking about eukaryotic cells, which are the kind of cells that contain DNA. by the powerhouse, we were talking about the fact that it produces energy in the form of ATP, which is the energy currency, and it kind of acts like a battery within the cell. So when there's energy going into the cell, ATP can reform out of the products, and when energy is required, it can break down to ADP and PI plus the energy, and that can be used to help move things around within the cell. And then also, so that helps with these essential functions, things like muscle contraction and so on, cell division, reproduction, whatever it might be. And it also helps with homeostasis, so it just helps the cell to kind of really maintain its integrity and do what it needs to do and stay in the status it needs to be a cell. So I'll be curious on your reflections on how you found this process. I personally found this really helpful. I felt like I started off with something that I knew was true and I knew was important, and I've expanded in a whole heap of different directions in quite a controlled way. I didn't feel overwhelmed at all within the learning process, and I felt really in control of the learning process the whole time. So this is like a first attempt at layered deconstruction. I'm going to keep playing with this approach. If you have a play, I'd love to know how you go. If you try it with your students, or if you are a student, I'd love to hear reflections too. And until next time, keep learning.